Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to this stage Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. Well, Jake, welcome back. Jake is an old friend of the LBJ Library. Many of you have seen him talk about his works of fiction on the stage. This is the first time he's talked about a nonfiction work. And Alex, this is your first time on the stage, so welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. And congratulations to you both on Original Sin. It's caused quite a stir, as I mentioned earlier. And
you know, it's funny because I don't know how Alex feels, but I appreciate the congratulations, and the book has, you know, any author wants a book to prompt conversation and sell well and get good reviews, but there's also a part of me, and I think Alex too, that feels a little ambivalent about it because it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy. We didn't know what we were going to find when we set out to write this book, and it's not, I mean, we couldn't believe what we found, but it's not joyous. You know what I mean? It's not like, woo, hooray. This is what was really happening. It's sad.
It was hard to watch when it was playing out in real time. It was hard to read as you dug further into the story. I want to ask, so the President of the United States is the most scrutinized man in the world by almost any measure. And yet, as you said, the cover-up that you allude to in the subtitle of the book was going on, as you write, under our noses. So talk about the reality of President Biden's mental and physical decline and how it manifested itself in the latter part of his presidency, Alex.
Well, it began in 2015 with this death of his son, Beau, according to people that worked with him closely. But there also is a difference between the Biden of 2019 and 2020, in which Republicans attacked him over his age constantly. And he did have moments, according to our sources, that troubled even his own aides. He would forget names of people he worked with for decades. But the old Biden, or the at times non-functioning Biden, was like a lot of old people. You have good days and bad days, good hours and bad days, and the ratio changes over time. And what our reporting shows is that by 2023, 2024, that ratio changed significantly, and that basically by the end of 2023, there was a large effort from the White House to hide the Biden that we all saw on that debate stage, not just from the public, but from members of his own cabinet, from members of his own administration, and from leaders of the Democratic Party, to make it so even when they did see him and had moments that gave them pause, that they dismissed them as one-offs and basically believed what senior White House officials were saying constantly, which is he's fine.
Jake, were there any manifestations of this decline in President Biden's policy?
It's such an important question. One of the things, first of all, let me just say it's great to be back here at the LBJ Library, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And Mark is just such a wonderful and generous host, and everybody here at the LBJ Library is just so wonderful. And this is our last stop on our book tour, so I hope nobody from any of the other stops hears me when I say this is the best stop. So that's interesting. It's interesting, an interesting question, because the Biden team, before the book came out and then after the book came out, didn't challenge the premise of the book in the sense that they didn't, like the book says that beyond aging, which we all, if we're lucky enough to make it to 80, experience, there were moments of declined and deteriorated acuity, cognitive ability. And one of the things the Biden team said in response to the book was, we're still waiting for evidence that whatever they're talking about resulted in a bad decision or anything that affected policy. And it's difficult to say, well, this
bad policy decision is because of that, and not just because you made a bad decision, like in terms of inflation or the Afghanistan withdrawal or whatever. But there are senators in the book that we refer to who have moments with President Biden that leave them concerned. And I'll just tell you one of them, which is in June 2024. There's an immigration event at the White House, and Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, Democrat, big Biden supporter, goes to the event. And it's one of these, as Alex referred to, and we all can relate to either because of grandparents or parents or ourselves or loved ones, good days and bad days, good moments and bad moments. And it's a bad moment. It's it's not a great experience for people there. And Senator Bennet has a disconcerting moment with Biden backstage, and then there's a disconcerting moment in front of the cameras where Biden appears to kind of lose his train of thought in a very uncomfortable way, not just a common way that anybody can lose their train of thought. And Senator Bennet leaves the White House that June day. This is a couple weeks before the debate. And he thinks to himself, this is why our immigration policy in this country is such a mess. Because the commander-in-chief cannot manage the portfolio. And whatever you think of Trump or Obama or George W. Bush, they had a grasp as to what they wanted to do with the complicated issue of immigration with so many competing interests. And that Biden was not able to manage it. And in fact, one of the other things we uncovered was that the Department of Homeland Security under Ali Mayorkas expected early on in Biden's term that there was going to be some sort of order to take steps to try to secure the border. And it's an order that never came. So it's hard to disprove a negative. You know, it's hard to say, well, because of this, there's this lack of action. But I think that that's one of the questions that Democratic senators raise. And one of the things we tried to do with this book is we started writing the book right after the election. We interviewed more than 200 people, and almost all of them were not just Democrats, but Biden-supporting, Biden-loving Democrats, who suddenly, with the threat of Trump now gone and the reality of Trump, the reality, felt more free to talk to us. And they revealed to us what really had been going on for years, especially 2023, 2024.
I'd just add to that we had a member of the cabinet say that, you know, the president is an old man. He's got 4 to 6 good hours a day. And if that's the case, then if he's focused on a few things, there's limited bandwidth. And then the rest of the government sort of goes, the senior staff is therefore more empowered to push things. And there were feelings among senior members of the White House and senior members of the cabinet that if Biden had been 20 years younger, there would have been some differences that maybe early on you would have not seen the Joe Biden who for most of his career had been a very center-left Democrat, ran on balanced budget amendments, in the past and wrote the crime bill that would have not necessarily pivoted to the left. But again, it's impossible to prove. That being said, I do think they will admit, yes, his energy was, so many senior Biden people will say, yes, his energy was limited. Yes, he could not speak in the same way that he could. Yes, he could not be relied upon to even do a 15-minute interview with Jake Tapper that he did in 2022 by late 2023. And yet, some of these people will still insist, but we know 100% that his decision-making was 100% fine. And they don't know. If there was a decline, such a precipitous decline, the easiest quote in Washington, D.C. for 40 years was Joe Biden, who would love to talk to reporters, and they admit there was a decline in his ability to speak, and yet they are insisting, but not in his decision-making ability. They don't know that.
Right.
And Mark, let me just interrupt for 1 second, just because And I'm sorry to be treading on your territory as the chief historian in the room, but it's not as if there isn't a precedent for a president who could run for 4 years, but because of his own concerns about his own health, decided maybe it'd be better for the Democratic Party to have a robust primary system so that a better candidate, or at least somebody who can definitely withstand 4 more years of this, go forward. And of course, I'm referring to President Johnson. And whatever his, and obviously there's a huge, we're sitting in a facility that is a testament to his achievements. Beyond those achievements, which are considerable, and beyond the legacy of Lyndon Johnson, is an act of self-realization, understanding his own limitations, and understanding no matter how much he wanted to be president for 4 more years, he physically didn't know that he could do it. And that rarely happens in Washington. I happen to think, in the case of Lyndon Johnson, it is under-celebrated because that really is an act of selflessness when you think about it.
But Jake, let's stick with history for a moment. President Biden's mental condition is not the first medical condition that's been covered up. In the history of the presidency, you had FDR, you had JFK, you had Ronald Reagan. How does this compare to those cover-ups?
So, I mean, it goes back to George Washington is the truth.
Yeah.
And obviously Woodrow Wilson is the worst example because he had a stroke and who knows how long how much he was actually even functioning. Alex always makes the point that FDR had no business running for re-election in 1944.
44.
Yeah, in 1944. That he was on death's door and everybody knew it, and the party let it happen. And the only thing they demanded was that the Soviet sympathizer vice president was kicked out and Harry Truman was brought in, and thank God they did that. But I think it's pretty bad. I think it's up there. We do not posit that Joe Biden is unable to have a conversation. We do not suggest that he could not come out and do a meeting with these good people and talk to you. I mean, I think he would see him every day of 82, but assuming he had rest and assuming that you got him on a good day, maybe you schedule it a little earlier in the day than right now. But at this point, we're already like grading on a curve. We're talking about President of the United States. This is a job that you should be able to take whatever is thrown at you at whatever hour. And the fact that cabinet secretaries were telling us that they didn't think by the end of his presidency he could manage that 2 a.m. phone call, that's shocking. And I think that we need to raise the bar a little bit for what we expect from our presidents, Democrat or Republican, in terms of their abilities at all hours of the day.
Let me go back to the first answer you gave, Alex. Aging is capricious, it's unpredictable. But what is the turning point? Did anyone see a turning point in going from the Joe Biden that we saw inaugurated in 2021 to the Joe Biden we saw in the last days of his presidency?
I will say that people around Joe Biden really associate precipitous drops when there is family drama and trauma associated with it. So I mentioned before in 2015, the death of Beau Biden. And then the reason why we discuss sort of the saga of Hunter Biden in this book is because people close to him say that 2 turning points were the unraveling of Hunter's plea deal in July of 2023, and then his own Justice Department appointing a special counsel in August of that year. And then the trial in June of 2024, just weeks before the debate, in which the family's dirty laundry, which they had been long trying to conceal, was aired in front of the world. And the Hunter story is tragic and sad. And you have a father that I think the key to understanding why, so many presidents have had sons that have created problems or relatives that have created problems. But I think the Hunter relationship is distinct in that Joe Biden clings to his son in a way that is unique. You know, this is not Roger Clinton and Bill Clinton. This is a relationship in which you have to understand that Hunter is the last living person from the 1972 accident that killed Joe Biden's wife, his daughter, and injured both Beau and Hunter. Then once Beau dies, Joe Biden begins referring to Hunter as my only living son. You know, there is this, this beautiful sort of embrace he has of his son, but also this, Hunter is able to use that for his own purposes. And Hunter, I think in his own way, sees a way to redemption for himself through his dad's presidency and beating back the force of Trumpism. And what it leads to is this sort of cataclysmic combination of drama and grief and, family tabloidism that becomes destructive to Joe Biden's psyche.
Beyond the unseemly, even sleazy nature of how Hunter conducts himself, the out of wedlock daughter and the relationship with his late brother's widow, and all of that. To understand what happened to the president and therefore what happened to us, one has to understand Hunter. And this is one of the discoveries we made while writing this book that I didn't fully get until really diving in, which was Hunter Biden was in that car where his mom and daughter were killed. Where his mom and sister were killed in 1972. Hunter, Beau, and then Joe Biden's first wife and their daughter. Hunter Biden, in addition to that trauma, also is an addict with all of that, what that disease, that horrible disease means to a person and to a family. And on top of that is Hunter Biden's own decision-making as an adult, which I think is questionable. Beyond any one of these aspects of Hunter Biden is the whole, and that is Hunter Biden in 2023, 2024 is saying out loud, and not just like internally in the family, but to podcasters and to people talking to him, that he thinks that the Republican Party is trying to get him to relapse, that the Republican Party is trying to get him to kill himself. That's what he is saying. And I'm sure he feels it. I don't doubt that he feels that. So in order to understand the deterioration of Joe Biden, the President of the United States, in 2023, 2024, is to understand, and again, one of the reasons why I think this book has gotten positive reviews from critics is because it is not a mean book. It is a clear-eyed book. It is an enraging book. But we are not unsympathetic to Joe Biden or his family at all. And what you have to understand is that Joe Biden in 2023 and 2024 thought he was going to lose a third child. That's what he thought. He was worried he was going to lose a third child. He lost his daughter in 1972. He lost his son, Beau, in 2015. He thought he was going to lose Hunter. And that, on top of whatever neurodegenerative experience he's having or whatever is going on, is what we all saw at the debate in June 2024. And it's sad, but it's also a reason why somebody should have said, President Biden, I don't know that you should run for re-election. Now, I don't know, and maybe you can enhance my understanding of this, I don't know if President Johnson, like if somebody said something to him or he just had the wherewithal to know that about himself, but President Biden did not surround himself with people who could say to him, this is a mistake, you're doing the wrong thing. And I think that's how we end up where we are today, with everything we're watching on CNN, hopefully.
And I want to reinforce the point you made. It is sympathetic at times. I think you do have sympathy for Joe Biden and his family. At the same time, the book is clear-eyed.
Yeah.
And you write about certain groups of enablers in the White House, including the tight-knit group of aides who surrounded Joe Biden, who you call the Politburo, who are called the Politburo.
Yeah, we didn't come up with that.
You didn't, right, they were called the Politburo, and for good reason. The Biden family, most notably Jill Biden, and the president himself. Who is most culpable, Alex, for the cover-up?
I mean, history, I'm sure, is going to keep writing, but I think first and foremost is Joe Biden. Because again, we do not say this guy was a brain in a jar for 4 years. Now and Joe Biden could have made the decision. Joe Biden also, if you remember, in 2020, made it very clear to the American people that he saw himself as a bridge. And then he decided he wasn't going to be, or he was going to be an 8-year-long bridge. And he, and he was, for lack of a better term, he was feeling himself after the midterms in 2022. It's like a classic story of power. You begin feeling that you are not only, an important man, but the only man. And I think he began to feel that he was uniquely suited to beat back Trump, that was uniquely suited to this moment. And he had all these people around him that were telling him the exact same thing.
Is that a function of ego, of hubris, of vanity? What is it?
Yes, all of them. I mean, there's a guy that's been wanting to be president since he was like a young kid. If you read go back and read his 2006, 2007 memoir, he's in front of his at his old Catholic high school, and he's like, he was asked about being president. This is why he's senator. And he does the classic, oh, well, maybe, I don't know, I don't really think about it. And the nun brings out a paper that he wrote when he was 8 years old and is like, why I want to be president. And, this is a guy that had been dreaming of this forever. And if you had ever covered, Jake, interviewed him much more, but like on Capitol Hill, like this is a guy that wore his presidential ambitions on his sleeve. And also, someone told us that, and Joe Biden is a man, very proud man, wears the chip on his shoulder. And at one point, and always resented the elites, the Ivy Leaguers. And at one point, he began to also see, when he thought about Obama, someone close to Biden told us that when he talks about Obama, he's talking about the elites, or vice versa too. And, the fact that Obama, in Joe Biden's mind, and this is a longer conversation, but in Joe Biden's mind, but Obama picked Hillary over him. And in 2016, and he and his entire inner circle have never gone over it. And it is part of this larger, you talk about ego, you talk about resentment. It's all of those things. It's this cauldron of emotions and a team in which I think everyone had sympathy for him to the point that they were no longer clear-eyed.
And to contribute to your point, Obama also tried to talk him out of running in 2020 as well, right?
Yeah, and he wasn't hugely supportive in 2024 either. And one of the things that I don't even know if Obama is fully cognizant of in terms of what he was thinking at the time, but when President Obama was talking to Joe Biden in 2015 about whether or not Joe Biden was going to run for president the next year, he had just lost Beau.
Yeah.
And let me just say, Beau Biden, I knew Beau a little bit. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
That was a loss, not just for the Biden family and Beau's friends and Beau's wife and kids. That's a loss for the country. He would have been a great public servant beyond Attorney General of Delaware. But when the first moment when we were researching this book, and we heard the first time that somebody detected a cognitive decline in Joe Biden was then, after the death of Beau in 2015, 10 years ago last month. And this top aide to Biden at the time said that Joe Biden's psyche, it was like watching water poured on sand, like what happened to him. That was really telling. And President Biden and President Obama, their relationship has never recovered from that moment when Obama suggested that Biden wasn't ready to run for president. Now, the way Obama put it and puts it is he needed to take care of himself as a person before he could do something like run for president. But given now the 2020 hindsight we have, and we have 10 years of decline in various ways, I wonder if what Obama was witnessing in 2015 was not just a man in the full, understandable throes of grief, but something else, something cognitive. I don't know, and probably President Obama doesn't know, but in retrospect, I wonder about that.
You mentioned, Jake, the 2024 debate, the only debate that Trump had with Biden, and they of course debated in 2020 as well. But you write of that, millions were shocked by Biden's unintelligible, slack-jawed performance.
I was one of the millions, by the way. Yes,
and this is important. To my mind, it's the most consequential and determinative presidential debate in history.
Thank you.
But you were not only in the room when it happened, you were moderating that debate with your CNN colleague, Dana Bash. So what was it like to be in that room moderating that debate?
So it was, I think, oh, my microphone fell off here. So it was, I went back and I watched it to write this book. I went back and watched the debate. And I'll tell you, I know it was bad for all of you. It was worse for me and Dana. I'll just say that, because in person it was even worse, because in person there's just it's the difference between the theater and television, I guess, but like the humanity laid bare right in front of us was tragic. To see somebody not able to come up with the words, to follow his own train of thought, he had one job, which was, the American people are concerned that they don't think you have the stamina and acuity to do this job for 4 more years, so you just need to demonstrate that. And it's like and I'm not trying to make light of it, but it's like he heard the assignment as the exact opposite of what it was. Oh, demonstrate that I can't do this, right? That was almost as if what his performance that night was. Rahm Emanuel, who was an Obama chief of staff and Biden's ambassador to Japan, later said to a White House staffer, it was irretrievable. What Biden demonstrated to the world was he could not do the job. And watching it was very sad. So just to bring you a little bit backstage, so we're in Atlanta at CNN's Atlanta offices, and it is June 27th. Mm-hmm. So we're almost at the 1-year anniversary. Feels like a lot longer than 1 year. Mm-hmm. Both President Trump and President Biden have been invited to come earlier in the day to go through the walkthrough, which is a very normal procedure for any debate. And of course, neither one of them shows up on time because they're both big deals. But Trump does at least show up within a 2 or 3 hour period of his assigned time. And Trump, whatever you think of him, he's a creature of television. He walks in, he finds out his mark, which is my camera. Is the camera on me when he's talking? What about if I want to do a follow-up? He's asking all the questions for a television performer. For good or for bad, that's who he is. And the debate is set for 9 p.m. Eastern. And by 8 p.m., President Biden has still not shown up. Now, we know that he's in Atlanta because we get the pool reports, and Air Force One has touched down. And somebody at CNN, an executive, calls somebody with the Biden team, where is the president? Why hasn't he done the walkthrough? And is told, oh, he's done so many of these, it's fine. It's no big deal. Which is kind of an interesting answer, especially in retrospect. So the CNN person says to the Biden person, you really probably should go and see what this is like because it's not typical. There's no audience. It's just this closed set. You should just see the cameras and, I mean, what are you doing? What are you doing? You have one job, maybe show up. Anyway, so Dan and I are supposed to go out at 8:30 that night, but we can't because President Biden's out there. So we're not able to go out there until 10 of, which is late for something like that. Normally you'd go out half an hour ahead of time and just they'll test camera angles and make sure the lighting's good and the mics are good and this and that. As I'm walking out there at 8:50, I'm 56 now. So I like sleep. Maybe some of you can relate. You hit 50, you're like, I have a ring that helps me with my sleep. I'm like, this is no longer something to be dreaded. It's something to be embraced. So I'm going out there and I'm like, it's so late. 9 o'clock. It's not going to be over. It's not going to be over until 10:30. It's way past my bedtime. That's what I'm thinking. And then President Biden shuffles out. I'm like, oh, God. And this is what I thought, what is it like for him? I'm 56, and this is how I feel. He's shuffling out, and if you had not been watching him age over the previous 4 years, and I don't expect you had been keeping up with it like a presidential historian or like White House reporters or whatever, it might have been a little shocking. His gait was significantly compromised because he has a deteriorating spine. He had a cold in addition. And beyond the cold, his voice has gotten thinner and higher and reedier. And he didn't project vigor, I think it's fair to say. But the debate starts, and he's coughing. Okay, he's got a cold, whatever, it happens. But then that first answer, not the first answer, but the first awful answer in the first block where we're talking about the economy. And he's listing all the things that he's trying to achieve, child care, elder care, and then it's like he wakes up in a different movie. It's just, one of these things what was I talking about? And it's so awful and uncomfortable. And he's just grasping at words and phrases, and you can tell he has safety clauses that he grasps onto when he loses his train of thought. That'll hold on to until he remembers what he was actually saying. But this time he doesn't. And he ends with, we finally beat Medicare. And I say, thank you, Mr. President, your time is up. President Trump. And President Trump responds, he did beat Medicare, he beat it into the ground, whatever he said. And again, let me just say one other thing for President Trump. It's difficult to ever describe President Trump as restrained or charitable. These are not the adjectives that immediately leap to mind. And he was full Trumpian with a fire hose of whatever that night. But he did not do what he could have done. And I'm not saying he should get the Nobel for this, although probably somebody will get the idea because I say this. But he did not make light of what was going on with President Biden. He said, he made one comment that night. He said, I'm not sure what he just said, and I'm not sure he knows either. And that's it. That's the one comment. But during that first chunk, Dan and I are sitting there, and we have iPads so that we can communicate in writing with the control room. And we also have our paper and pens. And I write when it becomes clear that I do not know what is happening with President Biden. But this is just, obviously, they have been hiding. I mean, it's just a recognition, and I think we all felt it, like, oh my God, everything that they have been saying about him is right. Like, it's actually much worse than we see. And I wrote on the iPad, holy smokes. I kept it clean because I did not know who was in the control room. There was always a chance my mom was there. I mean, you got to keep it clean. And Dana wrote on a piece of paper, he just lost the election. God bless Mark, he asked me if we had the paper that Dana wrote, because that maybe the LBJ Library could exhibit it someday. I think it was all shredded very quickly after the debate. But it was just horrific. And then there were answers that were less horrible than others, but you all saw it. It was just, and the worst thing to think about is that, like, the worst two answers were in the first 20 minutes of the debate. And there was still another 100 minutes after that. Am I doing the math right? No, maybe not 100 minutes, maybe 80 minutes or whatever, 70. Come on, Harvard, help me out here. 70 minutes. We're humanities guys over here. 70, sorry.
So we know that Joe Biden drops out of the race on July 21st after a couple of uncertain weeks where he's getting pressure, Alex, to step aside. What does that look like inside the White House, those couple of weeks after this disastrous debate performance and his announcement that he's going to step aside? Please.
It's not just a disastrous debate performance. It is the worst debate performance in the history of presidential debates, period. Like, I was stunned to discover that the first presidential debates actually were also the first televised presidential debates, that there was no history of presidential debates until 1960. So we actually have all of them on TV, and you can look them up. There's nothing that even comes close. It's astounding.
There's a highlight reel or a low light reel, depending on how you look at it, of these debate moments. Nothing comes even remotely close to that performance by Joe Biden. It's determinative in a way that no other debate performance has been in the history of presidential debates. But Alex, what's happening in the White House between the debate and his decision to step aside?
So there's a few different factions. So there are people, and we have a senior White House official that left in early 2024, in part because they didn't want to be a part of this, that they felt that the White House was intentionally shielding the president from other members of the administration, other staff, because of what was happening with his decline. And so what happened was a lot of people, including people that normally would see the president a lot, including cabinet members, including other senior administration officials, had not been seeing him a lot in those previous 6 to 9 months before the debate. So in one contingent, there's disillusionment and anger at this inner circle for saying, how could you let him go on that stage and embarrass himself in front of the world and mar his legacy? There is, and honestly, as someone, I covered Joe Biden for 4 years, people that I had been trying to talk to for years, first time ever they started talking to me because they were that angry. Then I think the inner circle, who, by the way, most of them, if you were to ask them today, they still think Joe Biden could still be president until January of 2029 and be as sharp as ever, as they often said.
Which is crazy. That's crazy. President Biden, even if you think he's the greatest president since LBJ, he is not able to be president of the United States until January 2029. And it's shocking. But the Politburo not only still thinks that he could have won against President Trump last November, but that he could do that for another 4 years, which is, he couldn't even make it. Right. He couldn't even make it through The View.
Yeah. Well, and now we know he obviously, sadly, has stage 4 cancer. Right. Another sort of, if in some ways it's like, what if he'd won? And what, there are people, longtime Biden people, that believe that a constitutional crisis would have eventually been precipitated because clearly the people around Biden were in denial about the extent of his decline and were not willing to cede power. And I think, during that 3.5-week period, the people immediately around Biden went to basically the next level down in the bunker. And they wanted, and you see it from their fiery and just the dismissive attitude about the collective freakout that was happening among Democratic elites. And let's also, the Democratic Party pushed and bullied Biden out of this race, but they only did so not because they were like, the guy can't do the job, this could be bad for the country. They were like, oh my God, Joe Biden is going to lose us the election, including our elections. It was a act of completely just pure political calculus, not based on any other principle other than we're going to lose a bunch of Senate and House seats and the White House as well. And so those are sort of the three contingent reactions in those 3.5, and they're all sort of battling each other.
Jake, let me quote a recent article in the New York Times, which stated, intentionally or not, by being the author of a major book on the subject, Mr. Tapper has allowed himself to become a symbol of the establishment press that conservatives have long accused of hiding the former president's frailty from the public. Is that a fair characterization?
I think it's fair that conservatives look at me that way. I wouldn't take issue with the reporter from the New York Times. I don't think it's fair to say that I was hiding anything. I saw what everybody saw. In October 2020, I interviewed Joe Biden in September 2020, and the interview's online. You can see it. He seemed fine.
Yeah.
I said, if elected, you'll be the oldest president ever. Would you pledge to be transparent with your records, blah, blah, blah. And he seemed fine. And there was nothing about the interview that we did that would make me think there were any acuity issues. The next month, in the throes of the final weeks of the election, Laura Trump, the president's daughter-in-law, came on the Sunday show, State of the Union, and at one point said something about Joe Biden and his acuity, and I was dismissive of her. And, in context, keep in mind, October 2020, very hard-fought election. Donald Trump Jr. is accusing President Biden, or then Vice President Biden, of being a pedophile. All sorts of charges are flying. And I was dismissive of what she said. After Alex and I did the research on our book, we concluded that the decline started in 2015, and there was evidence of decline in 2017. And I said to Laura Trump privately, you were right and I was wrong. And when the book comes out, I'm going to say that. But beyond that, I was not a defender of Joe Biden's acuity. I was just a reporter. And when Alex started doing his great reporting, questioning how Biden's limitations were, how the White House was adjusting them around Biden, I started booking him on my show. This audience is not interested in it, but I could list 5 things I did that show you that I was interested in this story. The larger question, though, beyond me, which is not particularly interesting, but the larger question of the media, right. What did we know and when did we know it, is we knew what you knew. Because Joe Biden was not an accessible president. He did not have people into the room all the time. Mm-hmm. He did not talk to reporters all the time. He only did an interview with a national newspaper in the very last week or so of his presidency. He did not do an interview with the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, et cetera. he limited his press conferences. He limited his engagement with the press. And then after, as Alex mentioned, the 2023 legal travails of Hunter, they really started cordoning him off. So the question becomes, what did the press know? When did the press know it? We knew what you knew. Should we have known more? I agree with the very general premise that the press should have been more aggressive. I should have been more aggressive, without question. But reporters are only as good as our sources. And the truth is, there are very few stories in the 4 years before the debate, and even up until the election, there are very few stories that break the news that we break in our book.
Yeah.
Because people weren't talking. And conservatives, I give the conservative media credit for their skepticism was warranted, but they weren't like breaking all sorts of great investigative reports on what was really going on behind the scenes. They weren't. They were running the clips, as we all were. They were running the more. Okay. We all saw them, but we didn't know how bad it was behind the scenes, I don't think, until the debate.
Yeah.
So did we come up short? Sure, 100%. But I still struggle to figure out, beyond kidnapping and sodium pentothal, what we could have done to get people to tell us the truth if they were reluctant to do so. Right. There were reporters, Alex included, who did really good reporting on what was going on. Peter Baker at the New York Times did a piece when he realized that an international trip was suddenly cut into two, separated by a month because Joe Biden was too old to handle the whole trip. Annie Linsky and Siobhan Hughes of the Wall Street Journal did a great report in June 2024. Behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. But generally speaking, there was not any investigative reporting that really exploded this all because the Biden people had convinced themselves and the Democratic Party, if you tell anyone anything, you are helping to elect Donald Trump.
Right. Let me go, Alex, from our former president to our incumbent president. On May 31st, President Trump used his Truth Social account to repost a conspiracy theory that Biden was executed in 2020 and replaced with, and this is a quote, clones, doubles, and robotic engineered soulless, mindless entities.
You would have thought they could have gotten a better double.
But I have to ask, because this came from the President of the United States, is there any evidence that President Biden was assassinated in 2020 and replaced by a robot?
No. And again, I know it's early days of AI, but I just think they could have done a better job. You would think at least AI could speak coherently in complete sentences. But no, there is no.
But I ask, look, I obviously that's the answer, but
yeah.
Jimmy Kimmel made a point in his monologue after this was posted. He said, how is this not on the front page of everything? The President of the United States is spreading deranged stories about his predecessor being a robot. So how do you measure President Biden's mental acuity with that of Donald Trump? And that sounds like a setup, and I wasn't going for that applause. Thank you very much. I really wasn't. But honestly, there is this outrageous behavior that we see from Donald Trump through which we could question his mental stability, his acuity, certainly his responsibility.
Sure.
How do you explain it? How do you size them up?
Jake often has a line, which I'm going to steal right now, which is, the thing is that Trump has been acting this way for a very long time. And so is it decline or is it another wing of the hospital? And
I covered this in the first term, in Trump's first term, which is the questions about Trump are questions about personality. They're about whether or not the allegations are that he has a personality disorder, whether it's malignant narcissism or whatever. And I mean, of course, he's 79, and you can see evidence that he's, when he confuses Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley, obviously, there's evidence that he's aging too. Father Time, undefeated. But I think that the Trump issues they're different. And it's not a cop-out, it's just, they're different. They're personality issues. This is who he is. When you see video of him dancing with Jeffrey Epstein, like when he's in his 30s or 40s, like, yeah, that's who he is. He is that guy. And if you don't like that personality and think that there's a diagnosis that applies, then have at it. What happened with Joe Biden wasn't about his personality. It's not about whether he's a decent man or an indecent man. It's about acuity. It's about his cognitive abilities. So yes, it's a different wing of the hospital. It's psychiatry is over there, and neurology is over there, and that's how science works. It's different. I think I look at that truth or whatever.
Yeah.
That he's just messing with us. He's just like, he doesn't care. He's trying to, one of the lessons I feel like I learned in the first term is focus on what he's doing, not on what he's tweeting. Because I think what he's doing when it comes to Harvard or the international students or the deportations, we don't have all night, but you get the idea. Like, there's a lot of stuff that they're doing and doing more effectively in the second term than they did in the first. And to me, that's more important than chasing every tweet, because I think sometimes those tweets are, pointing a dog at a squirrel. Look at the squirrel, and I could spend 2 hours proving that Joe Biden was not assassinated. And the replacement is not a clone because technology has not gotten that far.
Right.
Or there's actually serious stuff he's doing or not doing. And I take the point. I get it. I understand it. I have to live with it every day when we cover this stuff. But it's just different. And the other thing is that the reason that Donald Trump is has been reelected, according to all these top Democrats that we interviewed for this book, is because Joe Biden did this. Because he decided to run for reelection, which was the original sin, and then they decided to hide as much as possible his acuity issues. And that Donald Trump was beatable in 2024. It's not like 80% of the American people had great memories of Donald Trump. It was a question about who was less awful for the swing voters in those 7 states. And because of inflation and Joe Biden's acuity and Kamala Harris's limitations within that 107-day window, he won.
You have alluded to a challenge that you have to have every day, though, Jake, and that is that there is this intentional strategy by the Trump administration, by Trump himself, to flood the zone, this muzzle velocity, which is generating this constant activity. And you have to sort through the outrageous stuff which doesn't mean anything and the stuff that does, the distraction from the destruction. How do you do that?
It's a question of talk versus action. And I think it's just focusing on what is happening right now. Like right now, Israel's in the middle of 2 wars. Right now, Ukraine and Russia are in the middle of a war. Right now, tariffs are wreaking havoc on small business owners from coast to coast. Right now, There is a war against higher education. Right now, there is a war against the judiciary in some ways. I mean, there are actions taking place. And I just think it's important for the news media to focus on the actions and not be distracted by the obvious attempts at distraction, which is a retruth at 2 a.m. about a robot. And this, I mean, you know, I saw it and I had the same reaction. That's nuts.
Right.
But it doesn't affect anybody's life, really. Whereas families are literally being torn apart. I don't have to tell Texans that.
Right. Alex, what is Joe Biden's legacy?
I mean, people like you and presidential historians are going to determine that. I will say in the short term, and this is what people around him that work for him that still really love him feel, is that, listen, by his own standards, he failed because he framed his presidency about beating back the forces of Trumpism. And Trump was reelected after his presidency. And, I think the people around Biden think that, still believe he could have won. And I'm almost certain they will go to the end of their days saying that if the Democratic Party hadn't freaked out and drove him out of the race, then his legacy would be secure. I think the reporting around this book and also by the conclusion of his own pollsters think that is not true, and that he was headed not towards just a loss, but having Democrats lose up to 4 to 5 more Senate seats and several more House seats if he had stayed in. And but that is not, as people like familiar with President Johnson know, a presidency is not just one thing, even if they do set their own stakes. President Johnson is not just Vietnam. He's also not just the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act or the Immigration Act or all the other things he did. Every presidency is full of hundreds, if not tens of thousands of decisions, and what the legacy of those decisions he made in those 4 years, we just don't know yet.
It is interesting to think about what his lesson would have been. There are people in the Democratic world, Democratic officials, who think one of the worst things that happened to President Biden was he invited a bunch of historians, no offense, to talk to him in 2021. And a number of them were telling him to embrace his mandate, to become FDR, to become LBJ. Yeah. And he certainly tried to do that in terms of some of the big ticket items, in terms of infrastructure, other things that didn't go as well in terms of inflation and the like. But it is interesting to think, what if one of those historians had said, you should follow LBJ's example and for your own health reasons, say you will not accept, nor what's the language? I will not seek, nor will I accept the nomination of my party. And if he had done that in either 2023, April 2023, when he announced it, or at the end of 2023, when he really was starting to show serious signs of decline, if he had done that, even November or December, there were a number of governors watching him at that moment, Democratic governors, watching him at the end of 2023, waiting to see, is he really going to go through with this? They won't admit it, maybe not until their dying days. But what we know, that there are a number of them sitting there watching. And if Joe Biden had said in November or December of 2023, my health is deteriorating, and I think it's best for the party and for the country if there be a robust Democratic primary. Obviously, I've already picked Kamala Harris, so you know where my loyalties lie, but the party should decide who the next nominee is. That's an idea that the Democratic Party hasn't really tried since 2008, letting the voters have their say. And it worked out pretty well in 2008. There would have been a very vigorous, robust primary and caucus process. It would have been hard fought. whoever emerged would have been stronger, would have been able to have put the parts of the Biden legacy that the voters did not like, such as inflation, aside, at least more than Kamala Harris was able to in 107 days, and probably would have been decades younger than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump won handily the popular vote. But if you look at the electoral vote, he won by about 250,000 votes in 3 states. And I have a very difficult time not imagining that some other ticket could have done better if they'd had the whole year. Whatever that ticket looks like, you put it in your brain, because it's Earth 2, so it doesn't matter. But it's Gretchen Whitmer and Raphael Warnock. It's Gavin Newsom and Hakeem Jeffries. It's Josh Shapiro and, Shaq. I don't know. But it's impossible to argue that person would not have been at least as good as Kamala Harris was able to be, if not better. So, I mean, that's really the thing. But no historian, and obviously they should have invited you to the meeting, but no historian was able to say, don't only follow one part of LBJ's example, follow this part too, because that was, even though Nixon did win, that was part of his legacy. That is part of his legacy. And again, I think it's a part of his legacy that probably should get more attention, because it's very selfless. It's very difficult to give up power, and he did it.
As we wind down, I want to ask you both, what is the primary lesson you would want readers to derive from Original Sin, Alex?
That this is not just a story about Joe Biden. It's a story about groupthink. It's a story about political courage, but more often political cowardice. But the thing that I guess, like the one takeaway I think is there are some characteristics that I think are only seen as good things. Loyalty as one. And there are dark sides to those things that are often always only seen as virtues. And I think what you saw with this Biden crew was the darker side of how loyalty can fester into something where you forget that you're not just, that your loyalties go beyond your person you work for, especially in the White House, that your loyalties go to the country, to the party, to the White House. And I think a lot of people in this story lost sight of that. And I don't think it's particular to just this president or this story. I think it is something that you see in royal courts throughout history. And so that would be the one thing that keeps coming to mind.
Jake?
One of my favorite quotes, and it's in the book, you alluded to it earlier. I wasn't checking email, I was getting the quote ready.
Just ignoring me.
No, I was preparing for my answer. I had to, follow you. George Orwell once wrote that quote, "We are all capable of believing things which we know to be untrue. And then when we are finally proved wrong, impudently twisting the facts so as to show that we were right. Intellectually, it is possible to carry on this process for an indefinite time. The only check on it is that sooner or later, a false belief bumps up against a solid reality, usually on a battlefield." Now, when George Orwell wrote that, he was talking about World War II. He wrote, quote, "The Germans and the Japanese lost the war quite largely because the rulers were unable to see facts which were plain to any dispassionate eye." And then he said, and this is one of my favorite quotes ever, "To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle." And that's the lesson for me. We all saw it happening, and we all refused to see it. And maybe some of you are exceptions, but as a general note, and it can be tough. in the world we're in, especially, I mean, Orwell didn't even know, I mean, he didn't have social media to deal with, right? He didn't have Fox. But to see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. And like, sometimes the reality is right there. An example, of course, the Trump family is making a lot of money off the presidency. And we're all watching it happen. And maybe it's completely legal, but wow, it's right there. And we're all just watching it. And it doesn't get commented on all that much. And similarly, and perhaps to much more consequence, Joe Biden's deterioration. Tragic, but not just tragic for him, tragic for everybody.
When President Obama stood on the stage 11 years ago, he quoted President Johnson, who said, "If I walked across the Potomac, the headline in the next day's Washington Post would read, 'President can't swim.'" But President Johnson, like President Obama, saw the importance of a robust fourth estate in the balance of power that makes up our democracy. So I want to thank Jake and Alex not only for being here tonight to talk about their book, but for what they do to strengthen our democracy by doing what they do. So Alex, Jake, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much.
It was a great conversation. Thank you, Alex. Great job.
Thank you.